There are things we only believe when we see them. And that's exactly what happened that day. The mother, with a firm posture and eyes that could cut through walls, walked into the establishment for what seemed like a casual visit. But what she saw there froze even the silence. Because no one expected the owner's mother to be there. No one imagined that this calm-looking lady carried a notebook full of truths no one else had the courage to speak. While others laughed, whispered, and kept up appearances, she watched everything. Took notes. Recorded it all. She was like a discreet investigator in a sea of hypocrisy. And the most intriguing part? What seemed like just another day turned into the beginning of a storm. This lady, as invisible as the humiliated employee, held secrets that would keep many up at night. Because when the truth arrives, it doesn't knock. It kicks down the door of lies with force. Do you think you really know the people you work with? Do you believe that injustice always gets swept under the rug? This story will challenge everything you think you know about power, loyalty, and redemption. Get ready to dive into a series of stories that show how silence can speak louder than screams, and how even the smallest gesture can cause the biggest shock. In the corner of the diner, between rushed orders and empty chatter, a silver-haired lady went unnoticed. But don't be fooled. She wasn't invisible. Sitting with her worn-out notebook, she saw more than any security camera ever could. She saw arrogance disguised as leadership, cutting glares, and contempt thrown around like crumbs. Every detail, every injustice, became ink in her notes. These are the stories few notice, but everything changes when they're revealed. While customers debated promotions or milkshake flavors, she saw what no one dared to mention: the quiet employee swallowing hard every time he was treated like trash. Some think silence is a sign of weakness, but there are silences that scream louder than any scandal. And this lady, with her calm presence, was the kind of person who could hear those silent screams. Some say it's just a job, but stories like this prove that dignity is priceless. When she handed that notebook to her son, the owner of the place, it was like striking a match in a gas-filled room. Suddenly, what had been ignored became the center of attention. It reminds me that sometimes, the ones we hear from the least are the ones who act the most. It's like in chess. A pawn can become a queen, and someone who seemed harmless might be holding the key to everything. And speaking of turning points, there are people behind the scenes playing dirty too. They just think no one is watching. Everyone loves to point fingers at the team's problem, but no one asks why the problem exists. That was the case with that employee. Quiet, hardworking, yet always at the center of the rumors. What few knew was that the true chaos maker was the manager, a master at manipulating narratives like a chess player with marked pieces. He planted distrust, twisted facts, and used his authority as a shield. Sound familiar? It's more common than we think. While the employee was being humiliated in public, the manager was falsifying reports so naturally it seemed like routine. His weapon? Prestige. The trap? The blind trust of his colleagues. He played them against each other and walked away looking like the problem solver. A practical example. Ever seen a boss invent rules that don't exist just to justify punishments? Or change the team's goals halfway through just to make it seem like no one measures up? These are the kinds of stories that show how badly used power can silently destroy everything. But the manager made a classic mistake, underestimating the invisible. The employee he was trying to tear down wasn't alone. Beside him was a force the manager never saw coming. Someone who watched, documented, and most importantly, believed. That's why I always say, no one can bring down someone with purpose. They can only delay them. And speaking of delays, there's a certain forgotten box in a dusty corner of the company that's about to make more noise than any formal complaint ever could. Amid the smell of mildew and forgotten boxes, something that once seemed useless turned out to be a ticking time bomb. A simple cardboard box, torn at the edges, covered in dust. No one gave it a second thought, except the janitor. While cleaning the storage room, he found it. Curious? Maybe. But what he did next was something only someone with truth in their heart would do. He opened the box, saw what was inside, and instead of hiding it, chose to speak up. No reward asked, just justice. Inside were videos, emails, contracts. Undeniable proof of a dirty scheme rotting the company from the inside. It was like finding a buried chest of untold stories, each document a silent confession. And the most amazing part? The janitor was never invited to meetings, never had a voice in decisions. But he was the one who brought the truth to light. That teaches us something powerful. Truth wears no uniform. It can come from the hands of someone who mops the floor, or from someone sitting at the head of the boardroom table. You know that feeling that no one's watching? That nothing's going to change? The box proved the opposite. Real change often starts with simple acts, like paying attention, holding on to something, and having the courage to speak up. That's why I say, if something seems too small to make a difference, maybe you just haven't looked closely enough. And funny enough, right next to that box, more small acts began to emerge. Whispers, notes, and stories that, even softly spoken, echoed louder than ever. Sometimes, the biggest revolutions begin with the smallest of gestures. That's how it started, with a simple handwritten note, discreetly left on a desk. No screenshots, no videos. Just honest words, straight from the heart. On that paper was a compliment and a confession, a summary of everything the mistreated employee had endured. Who wrote it? No one knew. But who found it was someone with the power to change the game. And they did. The owner of a rival company, curious about that forgotten piece of paper, read the note and was deeply moved. When she shared it on her social media, she didn't expect what would come next. Likes, comments, and most of all, collective outrage. The story spread like wildfire. And look, it all started with a scribble on paper. That proves words, even whispered, have power. Want to change something? Right. Share. Sometimes what's missing isn't courage, just that first little push. When the case exploded on social media, the silence became a headline. What was once swept under the rug became a public issue. What used to be an internal problem turned into grounds for external investigation. And all because of one sincere sentence left by someone who cared. The most interesting part? When the truth starts to spread, it finds allies in the most unlikely places. And among those allies was a young intern about to stumble upon even darker secrets. It was supposed to be just another afternoon of internship, the kind where no one expects anything beyond bad coffee and spreadsheets. But by clicking in the wrong place, or perhaps the right one, the intern opened a folder that shouldn't have existed. Inside were hidden documents, altered contracts, emails with veiled threats, and even records of bribes. This wasn't just a case of misconduct, it was a terrifying web of corruption. And she, a simple intern, became the keeper of one of the company's biggest stories. Scared, but determined, she gathered everything, saved files, printed evidence, documented every step. She decided to take the material to HR, trusting that justice would be served there. The problem? HR already knew. Worse, they were part of it. That's a lesson no manual really teaches. Sometimes, the gatekeepers of the system are also infected. And when that happens, you have to go further. Report to the right channels, seek external support, and keep evidence outside the system. What did she do? Exactly that. The truth, once set in motion, has no brakes. And even alone, she pressed forward. Not out of heroism, but because she couldn't stand seeing injustice being normalized anymore. Her story shows us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision made despite it. And you know what? That decision would open the door to a new kind of justice. Not the kind full of shouting and scandal, but one that would arrive quietly, like a silent storm, and change everything. While everyone expected the bomb to explode with screaming, headlines, and live scandals, what actually happened was almost poetic. A lawyer stepped in with a dossier. Cold, organized, detailed. Without raising his voice, he laid out each piece of evidence like dominoes ready to fall. No threats, no theatrics. The truth was all there, clear as day. And when the truth is that clear, it doesn't need noise. It speaks for itself. The impact was immediate. There was no room for lame excuses or time to invent new lies. One by one, the pieces fell. Silent dismissals, internal investigations, and structural changes within the company. It's funny how people expect justice to look like an action movie, when so often, it arrives as a whisper, but a whisper with the weight of thunder. And here's a powerful insight. Want to change something? Organize facts. Have proof. Use strategic silence as a weapon. This quiet form of justice was what most unbalanced the guilty. Because they expected war, but they got consequence. And amidst all of this, someone who had every reason to celebrate the downfall of those who humiliated her, made an unexpected choice. A choice few understand. A choice that, despite appearing to be weakness, was one of the greatest acts of strength and evolution a person can have. And you're about to understand why. Jennifer had every reason in the world to seek revenge. She was exposed, humiliated, and cornered by someone who used their position as a boss to belittle others. When the scandal broke and the supervisor lost everything, everyone expected her to celebrate. But what did she do? She offered forgiveness. Not because he deserved it, but because she refused to carry the weight of the hatred that had nearly destroyed her. And that, my friend, is one of the most liberating acts anyone can choose. Forgiveness isn't about the other person, it's about you. About freeing yourself from the invisible prison that resentment builds. Jennifer showed that greatness doesn't lie in retaliation, but in growth. Want a practical example? Instead of wasting energy fueling anger, write letters of forgiveness. Even if you never send them, practice guided meditations on emotional release, or read books like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. These practices may not change the past, but they can transform how you move forward. Jennifer's gesture was so powerful it even touched the most skeptical hearts. Some people saw themselves in the mirror for the first time in years. After all, if she could forgive someone who publicly disrespected her, who are we to carry small grudges like stones in our pockets? But the most beautiful part is that her act inspired something even greater, an invisible network of solidarity that slowly began forming around someone who had also been overlooked for far too long. Durant arrived in the city like someone carrying the weight of the world, homeless, unemployed, and stripped of dignity. Most people wouldn't even look him in the eyes. He washed dishes, cleaned sidewalks, did whatever it took to survive. But then his story began to spread, first as a comment, then a post, and suddenly, people started seeing him. Because true stories of struggle have a power no social facade can hide. Neighbors came together. One offered bricks, another gave time, another lent tools. Within months, a small house rose. No luxury, but full of humanity. And Durant, who once slept in the open, now had a roof. And more than that, a new hope. This kind of action reminds us that compassion doesn't require wealth. Want to help someone for real? Donate a meal, share a social profile, offer a free course. These small acts build invisible homes in the soul of those who receive them. The most surprising part? In rebuilding his life, Durant also helped mend many hearts. Because when we see someone rise again, something inside us rises too. And Durant didn't stop there. Washing dishes, yes, but also quietly cleaning the streets of an entire city. And one day, that silence turned into applause. Applause that came when he did something even more unexpected. Something that would transform that invisible man into a local legend. Durant never sought recognition. He spent his days washing dishes and his nights cleaning the streets, as if the city were his own home. No one noticed, no one thanked him. But he kept going, steady, silent. Until one day, he saw a child fall into the fountain in the square. Without thinking twice, he ran and saved her. In that moment, the eyes of the city turned to him, not out of pity, but out of admiration. A hero had revealed himself in the midst of the routine. It was only after the rescue that everything came to light. He was the one responsible for collecting the trash from the streets before sunrise. He did it with no salary, no contract, just out of love for the city that welcomed him. And here's the irony. The man who was once ignored was now being honored. A statue was raised in his name in the town square. But more than stone and metal, that tribute was a symbol that no good deed, no matter how small, goes unnoticed forever. Durant's story spread, and with it came a wave of reflection. After all, how many anonymous heroes cross our paths every single day without us even noticing? The young woman who helps an elderly person cross the street, the neighbor who takes care of the block, the teen who teaches underprivileged children how to read. These quiet stories are what shape the world. And when the courage of some meets the resilience of others, the cycle breaks, and something new begins to emerge. The company could have easily swept it all under the rug, like so many others, changed the names, faked a transformation, and carried on as usual. But something different happened. Inspired by Jennifer's bravery and Durant's nobility, they decided to break the cycle of silent injustice. They created an internal program to value the invisible. People who were once ignored began to be heard, trained, and promoted. It was the beginning of a new culture, born from the ashes of so many forgotten stories. The transformation was real. Employees began to share their own stories, ones they had previously kept hidden. The atmosphere changed. The masks fell. And the most surprising part? Those who once feared speaking up were now teaching others how to stand tall. You know what that shows? Justice is contagious. A practical example? Start by creating anonymous listening channels in your company. Encourage sincere roundtable discussions. Offer mentorship to those who've never had access. Small actions lead to big internal revolutions. Today, dozens of lives have changed because two people refuse to accept injustice as normal. And that's a lesson that goes far beyond the walls of any company. When someone rises, even in silence, they never rise alone. They carry others with them. And when that happens, well, even a simple visit from a mother can transform an entire place's story. So now tell me, after all of this, what will you do with these stories that just crossed your path? Will you keep pretending not to see the injustices around you? Or will you be that person who observes with a watchful heart and acts with silent courage? Maybe you're surrounded by Jennifers, Durants, and invisible observers. Or maybe you are one of them. The big question is, what will you do with what you've learned here? The truth is, we can no longer ignore the impact a simple gesture can have. A well-made report, an anonymous note, a sincere compliment, a fair action. Any of these can flip the switch in someone's life. So tell me, have you ever lived something like this? Been a witness or protagonist in a story worth telling? Share it in the comments. Your voice might be the beginning of the change someone's been waiting for. And of course, if these stories touched you in any way, made you reflect, feel moved, or reignited that desire to do the right thing, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell, because here, every week, you'll find stories that don't just inform, they transform. While many are shouting for attention, we choose to whisper truths that echo in the heart.